Hello and welcome to the Cube Talk Show. I'm your host for tonight, Joe Barbieri, and this is a show about money. We cover all aspects of money, and tonight we're going to cover employee theft. Our guest is Dean Correia he's a principal from CorreiaSecurity.ca, and Dean, how are you?
Excellent, Joe. How are you?
I'm good.
Good. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. So, employee theft, well, to elaborate, a manageable line of your P&L. I guess to start off, what do you do?
So my company, Correia Security.ca, specializes in security training workshops and services for businesses in order to protect people, safeguard assets, and optimize profit. Our niche is the retail and restaurant industry. That's my background. My background is 25 years in the security industry with 3 major global retailers. And my passion is protecting people and keeping them safe so that they feel comfortable coming to their work every day.
Mm. So it's an interesting topic because a lot of people have different views about it. And I guess to start with, how big is the problem of employee theft?
Great question. PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Retail Council of Canada just released a 2011 study about a month ago, and their survey data suggested it's about 1.2% of your net sales are lost in unaccounted for shrinkage. So money, merchandise, inventory that's lost that retailers and restaurant businesses cannot account for. Mm. So it's your studies will also tell you, Joe, it's about 1 out of every 10 employees. So if you have a business with 30 employees, then the statistics will tell you about 3 of those are creating a loss, either unintentionally through improper training, recording of sales, recording of merchandise as it comes into your business, or intentionally through theft.
Now, that's 1% of sales.
1.2% of net sales, correct.
So that's the top line.
Correct.
But by the time you bring it down to the bottom, is it something like 10 or 15%? Does it get like that?
Well, the way I break it down for my clients is to think about what their margin is. So if you're in a retail restaurant business and you have a healthy margin, let's just say for argument's sake your margin is 10%, and you lose $15,000 of merchandise and product that you can't account for every year, you have to sell 10 times that to bring that back. So if you lose $15,000 in a year, you have to sell $150,000 worth of product to make up for those losses that you can't account for. And that's a lot of money, that's a lot of product. And unfortunately, a lot of my clients come to me, Joe, when the loss has occurred or the negative event has happened. And that's why my passion is educating and informing. And I do that through my different workshops. So I have different workshops that I sit down with management, with CEOs, with business owners, and customize it to their specific industry and their specific business to teach them how to put policies and procedures in place, how to keep that door locked, quote unquote, and also how to recognize the signs and indications that employees may be making bad decisions that they're not aware of.
So, it's going to be a big range of examples, but just off the top, what's the most common type of theft that you'll encounter?
Yeah, I think, and I'll answer that question 2 ways, because that's a great question. I often get asked that. I think the most common is cash, and I think the reason for that is it's most accessible. Most businesses, especially if you're a retail and restaurant, are cash rich business when you think about what types of payments they accept. So obviously credit cards and debit cards are a factor, and there's ways to manipulate that as well, but most businesses are cash heavy, so therefore if I'm a dishonest employee, there's most access to cash. But something that's not really talked about is time. And time theft is a big problem that I think is underreported in Canada and the US. So for example, if I'm an hourly employee and your average hourly rate is $20 when you include benefits and salary and all that stuff, and I take 45 minutes a day, or all of the hourly employees in the restaurant take 45 minutes a day, and they come back 10 minutes late from a break, they start their shift 10 minutes early, but one of their buddies punches them in so it looks like they're on time. That's going to be about $5,400 a year for just that one employee. And again, if you use your 10% margin, then you have to sell $54,000 worth of product to make up for that $5,400. And over the years, my experience has taught me, Joe, that some of the root causes as to why people steal have to do with engagement, and as well as policies and procedures and training. So if you train your employees right off the bat and make it really clear what policies and procedures you have in place, that is a key mitigating factor to losses occurring. Also, you have to keep them engaged. If I'm disengaged from the business, if I don't feel part of the business, if I'm upset with the business for whatever reason, if I think the business is making $10 million a year and is not going to notice a box of pens or a stapler or $100 cash from the till, then I may make a decision to take. And if everyone else on the team is engaged, then they're more likely to report that Dean's making a bad decision. If they're not engaged, then my experience tells me that they may ask me, Dean, teach me how to do that. I could use an extra $50 a week or $100 a week or whatever it may be. I need some food for, my university dorm mates or whatever it may be. So engagement's key, and policies and procedures are key.
Now, does engagement mean motivation, or is that a different?
Yeah, it does mean motivation for sure, because if I'm engaged, I want to drive the business. I want to help it improve. I want to see it do well. And I understand that if I help my business do well, then that means more sales. And every retail and restaurant business base their hours that they schedule for their employees on top line sales. So when I talk about losses, and I talk to all the range of employees that are in a restaurant or retail business, whether it's an hourly employee, the manager, the president of the company, I'll break down the losses into an average hour. So for example, if your losses are $10,000 a month, and your average hourly rate is $20, then I'll break that down and I'll show the employees how many more hours they could have had on their schedule had those losses not occurred. And because hours on the schedule means more hours for them, more money in their pocket. So that's where the light bulb really starts to get on, and you create a team environment and an engaged workplace, because an engaged workplace is also a safe workplace, and a safe workplace is a profitable workplace.
Okay. This just came to me now, but these are losses that you actually know about. Is there, I would think there are cases when they don't know about it, or they're not sure how much it is.
Yeah.
They're saying, oh, I think we lost 20 grand, but it could be between 20 and 50, and we don't really know because we're not that exact. Is that something you find a lot that happens?
I do find that on occasion, and I have found that on occasion. I think the key, it'll never be 0%. Your losses, you'll always have losses. People are going to make mistakes ringing in sales. They're going to make mistakes handing back the correct change to customers, whatever it may be. You're going to have breakages and slippage. You're going to have some loss. However, it doesn't need to be 10% or 15%. Statistics will tell you that 30% of first-year businesses go bankrupt, and one of the key reasons is unexplained loss. So you're going to have some unexplained loss, but the key is it needs to be manageable, and you're doing checks and balances throughout the fiscal year, every month, at least every quarter, so that when you do your loss results, your inventory, whatever checks and balances you have at the end of the fiscal year, it shouldn't be a surprise. Just like when your kids come home with a report card, it shouldn't be a surprise to you. You should know how your kids are doing in school. Same sort of analogy.
So, I guess give me some examples of the type of losses you've seen. And you mentioned cash, you mentioned time.
Yeah.
Is there anything more specific that, because I would think it's quite diverse and
It definitely is based on the size and the type of business. I'll speak about two. One is loss of information, and the second is loss of product through your supply chain. So specifically, if you're a retail and restaurant business and you have proprietary recipes, for example, you have customer data that you need to protect, then those recipes, that customer data, does have some value if it gets outside of your company and into the hands of the wrong people. So I have experience where there's loss of information, loss of a competitor bid, of a proprietary process that goes to another competitor, and therefore if you and I are bidding on the same with the same vendor and we're competitors, Joe, and you want to know what my bid is, and you find out what my bid is on that service and are able to therefore undercut me, then that's valuable information for you. WestJet and Air Canada have had a situation where customer data was stolen. You know, and there was a large fine levied. So there's lots of examples. So you need to have checks and balances with your information. And one of the key things I talk to my clients about is who needs that information. You know, technology the way it is today, there's all kinds of information floating on the internet. But one of the key mitigating factors is make sure that only the people that need that information have that information. Does everybody in the company, for example, need your sales data? Does everybody need that recipe for your pesto chicken? Does everybody need to know what your 5-year strategic plan is? No. So make sure that those people only that need that information have that information. Everybody else that doesn't need it, don't have it. And then in terms of supply chain, I think it's really important to realize that organized crime is a significant factor in Canada and the U.S., and they're becoming much more efficient than they ever were. They're a business just like every other business out there. They have their strategic plans, they have their meetings, they have their functional engagements, and a lot of them are going right to the supply chain to steal large quantities, you know, off of a loading dock, off of a port, whether it's Montreal or Halifax or Vancouver, and they'll take 2, 3, 4 containers as opposed to hitting, you know, certain stores or certain restaurants. It's much more efficient to take an entire container. So there's definitely things that you need to do as a retail and restaurant business to make sure that your product is arriving on time, so that you can stock your shelves properly and have that merchandise on the shelf for the customer when he or she comes in, but also ensure that you're receiving it safely, and that merchandise that you're selling is not counterfeit, is not out of date, out of code, because your brand may be negatively affected if somebody gets hurt or worse by ingesting one of your products or using one of your products.
I'm assuming that you need to do this from beginning to end and have a check at each stage.
Correct. Yeah.
Otherwise, you may lose at any stage. And
yeah, absolutely. And from a supply chain point of view, I'll map out literally the supply chain from what I call farm to fork. So when it's manufactured to when it ends up in the customer's, you know, trunk in their car and they're driving away out of the parking lot. And I'll look for vulnerabilities all along that supply chain. And again, you can't possibly mitigate everything 100%. You need to, from a due diligence point of view, you need to mitigate the majority of your risks. And I talk a lot about a diligence, and that's where my workshops come in. Because if there is a negative event, you know, I have a workplace violence avoidance workshop, a robbery prevention workshop, and I've been, unfortunately, I've been through 3 workplace murders in my career. And one of the first things an employer will get asked when there's an incident like that on the job, when you're in court, is show me how you trained these employees. Did they know what to do in a workplace violence situation, in a robbery situation? And I think from a due diligence point of view, I'll talk to my clients about that's where your workshops come in. You can't prevent everything. You know, I'll often say that banks still get robbed and they have armed guards at the front of the door. However, what policies, procedures, training, security measures did you have in place to at least show diligence to avoid that happening? That's a key factor.
so do you get into things like employees shooting other employees, or are these is that part of the
That is absolutely part of my workplace violence avoidance workshops and my robbery prevention, because every violent situation, whether it's in the workplace or outside of the workplace, there's always 3 stages. Every case you can look at, the most recent ones that are in the news this past couple of weeks to decades gone by, there were always signs. And people often ask me, the situation in Connecticut 2 weeks ago, I've received some calls about that, and I've talked to people about, one of the ways to potentially mitigate those situations is through education. There's lots of people typically that notice certain situations but don't report it for whatever reason, because they don't understand how to report it, they don't know how to report it, they don't know how to recognize the signs of somebody potentially being violent. The high majority of the cases of violence, Joe, there are always signs. There's 3 stages. I don't go from being rational to chopping somebody's head off on a Greyhound bus typically. Okay, there's signs in between, and the key is, can people recognize the signs? Somebody somewhere has had to have seen a sign, and are they reporting it? So I'll always say to my clients when I'm building a workplace violence avoidance program is the number one thing that you can tell your employees is report. Don't filter, report to management, for example, and we'll deal with it. And We're not going to rush to judgment. We're not going to jump to a conclusion, but we'll investigate it, and that's our diligence.
So does it matter what size of business you have? If you're Walmart or if you're Green's Variety Store? I mean, there are differences, but is it easier to do it for a large company, for a small company?
I think it's more complex. I think to answer that question directly, I think the best time to put these policies and procedures in place are when the business is starting out. You start right from the beginning and you institutionalize it, and it's there for the life of the business. I think if you're looking at a Walmart, for example, I think what you may want to consider is looking at your highest risk stores and starting from there. If you're looking at a small, quote unquote mom and pop variety store or a cafe, then you look at who your key influencers are. You may not be able to get to everybody. Walmart, for example, has 90,000 employees. You're not going to be able to typically connect with 90,000, so you connect with the influencers and have them do a train the trainer or something along that line. So depending on the size of the business, you just have to customize your plan to fit the needs of the business. But one of the key things is making it live. In my experience, I'll often work with clients to launch a program, and my challenge to them always is make it live, embed it, make sure that every new hire that comes on board gets this training, that you're doing your due diligence, your checkups every quarter, every year, 2 times a year, depending on what the situation is, but you have to make it live. And that's one of the key challenges for a business, because you get so busy, and I understand that. I've been there. You wear 17 different hats. You cook, you clean, you open, you go to the bank, you put away the shipment. And like I said earlier, the high majority of my clients will come to me when there's some sort of a negative event, as opposed to understanding the real benefit from a diligence and a profit point of view, of embedding these procedures and workshops, right from the start prior to a negative event.
So the letting it live idea, that's keeping it up to date, is that?
Correct.
So
Correct.
if something's changing, you change with it and
Right. Yeah.
add to it
Absolutely.
or whatever.
So a new hire orientation checklist. So if I were to hire you, Joe, you're going to go through the same checklist, the same orientation as somebody that I hired 2 years from now. If you leave the business, do I have a checklist that says to me, change Joe's alarm code, change his safe code, get his store keys, get his company credit card, whatever that may be? Because even though you're a great guy, you may, in the rush of a moment or the stress of a moment, given somebody your safe code, an hourly employee that shouldn't have your safe code. And as the business owner, you're sure not going to come up to me and say, you know what, Dean, I gave Bob my safe code the other day because I was in a rush, we were busy, somebody called in sick, whatever it may be. So I'll always recommend change your codes every quarter. Your alarm codes every quarter, your safe codes every quarter, and make sure your cameras are working. Utilize what you have in place, and that's what I mean by in terms of making it live. Don't just install the cameras, but make sure you're utilizing them. Don't just give people codes, but check to make sure, is everyone sharing codes? Get an alarm report. Did Joe come in at 3 o'clock in the morning and have a party in the store? Or, did Joe come in at 7:30, but, he's supposed to start at 7, and talking about time theft, Joe wrote down on his time card that he showed up at 7. Well, no, you didn't, because the alarm code says you disarmed the store at 7:30. So it's those checks and balances that I'm talking about in terms of making things live.
I'm going to go on a bit of a limb, but I think this might be relevant. You're going to look at the whole picture when you're doing this. So the example you just said, you check 3 different sources, and if they tie together or they make sense, then they make sense, but you might find something that doesn't.
Right.
And the alarm will go off in your mind saying, wait a minute, that conflicts with that. We need to dig into this.
Yeah.
And maybe something will get discovered that
Right,
wasn't.
I always say I have 2 goals: to keep people safe and help businesses become sustainable and profitable. And I'll take a look. One of the first things I'll do is I'll take a look at with the client. I'll take a look at their profit and loss statement, and I'll have them explain to me where their concerns are. Where do they think they're losing money, or what lines on their P&L really concern them? And then from that, I'll customize an operational audit. So I'll go into their store It's typically 160, 180 questions, and I'll go from what I call sidewalk to loading dock, and I'll look at everything. I'll look at their physical security, how they hire, how they train, how they receive shipments, how they handle cash, how they handle merchandise, and the end result is I'll give them some comfort, saying, okay, I've got some great policies and procedures. I've got some things locked down, and then I'll also present them with some gaps and some opportunities, as every business has, and provide them with solutions to fill those gaps. And then the decision is ultimately there in terms of what solutions they want to take on.
Now, I know the title is employee theft. What about management theft? Do you get into that as well?
Absolutely, and I think that my experience, when managers steal, the dollar loss is a lot greater. Because if you want to create a loss in a company, Joe, my experience tells me that you need to know the internal operations, because you want to maximize your take and you want to minimize your risks. So if Dean's a manager and Dean's the one that always prepares the deposit 7 days a week for 2 or 3 years in a row, I never go on vacation, to me that's a red flag. First of all, from a quality of life and a business continuity point of view, Dean should be going on vacation, and if Dean gets sick for a significant period of time, who's going to do that deposit? And so you have to rotate things, rotate tasks, and I'll always say, the person that wants to take the garbage out every night, maybe they want to take the garbage out every night because they have 10 pairs of jeans in the bottom of that garbage bag, and they're just leaving it outside for when they leave work, then they'll just grab the garbage bag, things like that. So managers typically will steal in more creative ways, and the dollar amount is much, much bigger because they have access to hide the loss. So if I'm the one stealing the 10 pairs of jeans, then I can fudge the inventory numbers. If I'm the one doing the deposits, then I can fudge the deposit numbers. And unless somebody's checking that, you're not going to find that for a very, very long time. And I talk to my clients about, let's find the losses when it's a $100 problem, not when it's a $100,000 problem.
Now, do you have techniques for that?
I do.
That somebody can keep in mind, before doing a full-blown check? Is there something obvious that comes up that says that looks fishy?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that you need to look at your data. So what is your data telling you? Your POS data. So do you have a lot of voids that you can't explain, a lot of refunds that you can't explain potentially? If you and I are working on a busy Saturday, Joe, and you ring in $2,000 worth of sales and I ring in 200, and we work the same amount of hours side by side, that's odd, typically, right? Okay. So your data, so I'll often work with my clients to mine the data and develop what I call an exception-based report. So data that looks exceptional, looks odd, potentially indicative of fraud or theft. And like I said earlier, maybe it's a training issue. If I'm receiving a shipment and I type into the system that I received 100 boxes of chocolate bars, for example, but I really only received 10, unless you have a system to pick that up, you just lost 90 boxes of chocolate bars that you're not going to pick up until you do your end of your inventory. And that's a lot of margin, that's a lot of profit. So it's those checks and balances that I talked about.
Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break right now, and we'll be back and we'll continue the conversation. Back on the Cube Talk Show with Dean Correia, and we're talking about employee theft. Well, more like theft, period. But it's very interesting. So, why would somebody steal in the first place?
Given
that everything's reasonably controlled and set up.
Yeah, great question. I mean, my experience has told me that the number one reason people steal is because they have a need. So they have a need outside of the business. So typically at home, that they have a bill they pay. They're not able to pay, so they take money to afford that bill. And the risk is greater now than it has been in a long, long time. The studies will tell you that when the economy goes south, crime goes north. So people that people that normally wouldn't make a bad decision, and one of my mantras is good people make bad decisions, and that's the mindset that I have when I talk to somebody who's alleged to have stolen is that that person has made that bad decision they normally would have never made because they have a bill they can't pay. They have a baby to feed. They have, an addiction they just cannot manage. It's out of control. So to answer your question directly, number one would be they have a need, a financial need that they cannot meet. They have a lifestyle that they have to afford. The second would be a sense of entitlement. Some employees just feel that this company makes millions and millions of dollars. They're not going to miss $100 of cash. They're not going to miss a stapler or a pad of paper. To me, there's no difference stealing a pen and $100 of cash. If that's an asset of the company, that's theft, and should be dealt with in the same way. And also on the rare occasion, Joe, I'll be honest with you, that sometimes people steal because they're owed money. So a company forces them to work off the clock. Take transfers here, do all this stuff that they don't get paid for, so they've asked about it, or they've had a performance review and they're entitled to a certain raise and they don't get that raise. Paperwork's not processed. People aren't doing their jobs from an administrative point of view, and not that I agree with it, but I can empathize to a certain degree when I've sat down with people and I've asked them to help me understand why they've made the decisions they've made. Some of them have said, the company owes me money. And that has been proven out.
So, a related question: when somebody is caught stealing, what happens?
Yeah, and again, my recommendation is to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. I think we talked about deterrence a lot, and I think from day one, when you bring an employee on, you need to talk about what policies and procedures you have in place, train them to run the operations effectively so they don't make training errors like we talked about earlier, but also tell them what's in place from a physical security, alarms, locks point of view, so that when you have that conversation with them, potentially they can't sit across from you and say, well, I didn't know that this was not allowed or that was not allowed. They're very clear. They've signed off on all the hires documents that they've had. And they realize that it was wrong and it shouldn't have occurred, and that policy of prosecuting is an effective deterrent in my experience. And when somebody leaves the business for theft, different employers will want to publicize different things. Some employers will want to not say anything internally. Some employers in some industries will want everybody to know that Dean just left the business because he was fired for theft. And if you're thinking about doing it, then you need to stop, because that could be a potential consequence. Because when I interview somebody and they admit to theft and they're removed from the business, what I'll often say to my clients is there's going to be a chilling effect. Typically, when we look at the data after I remove one person from theft, sales go up for a 6 to 8 week period, because what you don't know is there's other people doing it, or other people were thinking of doing it, and because they know, either publicized or not publicized, they know why Dean left the business. They talk outside of work, and so they're either going to stop their behavior for a while, or stop it altogether, because they think the risk isn't worth the reward.
Now, so there's different ways you can do it, or to deal with the person.
Correct.
Now, I guess it'll depend on different things. Like, if you were to publicize it, there might be a negative effect as well, right? On the people that are doing a good job, they might say, oh, this is pretty harsh, and
correct.
Or there will be others who will, be happy that they publicized it.
Yeah, it's all, you're right. I mean, it's a mixed response, because if I'm working really, really hard to drive the business and somebody is impacting the amount of hours that I'm getting because they're stealing. We talked about how hours scheduled or related to sales. Then I may get upset with them and say, what? Well, you just took hours away from me. But I might empathize with them because I know they're having trouble outside of work or whatever it may be. But I think that the majority of people are law-abiding, policy procedure abiding people. I think that it's the exceptions. It's the 1 out of 10 employees we talked about. So that's 10% of your workforce, and that's who I deal with. on a regular basis. And I think that, locks keep honest people honest. So I think that if you have the policies and procedures in place, 90% of your employees are going to help you and be, policy procedure abiding and help you drive the business. And if you install a new security measure, then most people aren't going to get bent out of shape because they're following policy and procedure. Go ahead, put another camera in. Go ahead, look at your alarm reports. Go ahead, look at your deposit records. It's not going to bother me because I'm not doing anything wrong, right? It's the people sometimes that are up in arms about certain things that you may want to take a look at and think about why are they so up in arms about this new policy, this new procedure.
Do you ever have an issue of a lack of trust? That if there's too many procedures, that there's no trust? Is there such a thing as going too far? And
I absolutely think there is such a thing as going too far. I don't think it's necessarily the negative effect is necessarily a lack of trust, Joe, but you're not enabling the business. And from a security standpoint, my number one goal is to protect people and help businesses be profitable. And one of the ways to help them be profitable is to enable the business. I could go into a retailer and put locks on everything, cabinets, locks, so that every bit of merchandise is behind a locked cabinet. So your shrinkage or your losses are going to be really, really low probably, but your sales probably aren't going to be that great because it's very time consuming. Customers aren't going to be patient. They want to touch the product. So there's pros and cons, right? And I always say, banks get robbed even though there's armed guards at the front. So my number one goal to help people be profitable is to help enable the business and find out how we can balance sales generation with loss prevention. I think that's really key.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned the economy. Is it pretty direct that to say if your industry's not doing well, the theft goes up in that industry? If the general economy is not doing well, it filters. Is it that direct, or is there more?
I think it's an overall general statement, Joe, and I think what you really have to be wary of when we talked about looking at your data, right? Looking at your sales data, looking at your P&Ls, but also talk to your people. I often talk about engagement, and we talked a little bit about it earlier in the break, but find out what's going on. Find out what's going on with them and ask them, what's happening. You'd be amazed. Your employees are the greatest sense of information for you. There could be your strongest link or your weakest link. Sit down with them and find out what can we do better. How can we drive the business? They'll tell you everything that's going on because as a business owner, you can't be around 24/7. Your employees know what's going on. And when it's a tough time, some people may make that bad decision as we talked about. But engagement is key because like I said, if everyone's engaged, everyone's working towards a common goal of driving the business, and if potentially you're not treating them well, or they're feeling that the conditions are unfair, or they're feeling that they just want to know that as a business owner you care. Maybe sit down with them, even in a large town hall type format, and say, what guys, we're having a tough time. How can we improve the business? Sometimes your greatest ideas to generate business will come from your employees because they're the ones that have the most face-to-face interactions with your customers.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, well, we've talked about the employees and the management. What if the owner themselves is stealing? How does somebody deal with that? Yeah,
that's a great question. I think, again, you should have verifiable facts. Whether you're, when you're reporting a crime at work and you're alleging that somebody's stealing, I think the first thing that you're going to get asked for is show me some documentation. Why do you think that? Prove to me that this isn't a witch hunt. So you write down notes. I saw Dean come in at 9:15. Even though I saw him punch in for 9 o'clock, I saw him put that box of merchandise in his car on Wednesday night, whatever it may be, because there's ways with cameras, with alarm reports to potentially verify that. So if I'm the owner and you think that I'm doing that, write it down, and there's always the option of calling the police because they do have a responsibility to you as an employee to run a profitable business as well, because you're depending on them for your livelihood. So I think it's very, very important that there are those checks and balances in place, even whether you're the owner or you're a part-time employee.
Now, in the case where there are police called, they would still want that documentation that you have.
Absolutely. That's the first thing that they're going to ask for, is the documentation. Again, prove to me this isn't a witch hunt. Prove to me this isn't a he said, she said, because their resources are strapped too. So they're going to want to make sure that, they're following up. Obviously, their obligation is to serve and protect, so they will do that. However, it has to be a case based on fact and not emotion.
Now, on this same topic, so the auditors, the accountants, or insiders, people related, or the people doing the checking, if it's possible that they're in on the stealing or they're part of the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we talked a little bit about it earlier with the garbage scenario and the deposit preparation scenario. I think you can't have the fox guarding the hen house per se. I think you have to have those checks and balances. You can't have the same person verifying the invoices as writing the checks. In a previous life with another company, there was a $1.3 million theft case of somebody creating a fictitious company right in the global headquarters. And there wasn't any checks and balances in place until a new manager came on board and started asking some questions and started questioning, some invoices, that the scheme was uncovered. So I think you need to make sure that you have some checks and balances in place in key areas of your business. And we talked about the deposit preparation, the auditing, the receiving of shipments, again, from a business continuity point of view as well as from a theft prevention point of view.
Okay. Do you ever have cases of professional criminals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, organized crime is a multi-billion-dollar problem in North America, and I think that what a lot of people may not realize is they're a business just like every other business. They have their quarterly plans, their annual plans, their strategies, and they're very, very sophisticated. And again, they want to minimize their risk and maximize their take, and one of the ways to do that is to gather information about a business. And a lot of them will do it by quote-unquote casing a place or walking in and looking, seeing where are the cameras, where are the locks, where are the alarms, how busy is it, when do they have people on the floor, is there only one person on the floor, is there one opener, is there one closer, what does the store look like at 3 o'clock in the morning, is it all dark, is it well lit, so if I burglarize it at 3 o'clock in the morning and steal some stuff, is anybody going to see me in there? I also think that there's also proven cases, Joe, where organized crime intentionally come on board and get hired for businesses to learn those specific ins and outs, to get the details so that they can manipulate them. And I think that a key mitigating factor to prevent that is for a business to do your background checks and your reference checks properly and thoroughly every single time with every single employee. And I understand how busy, especially we just came through the Christmas season, and a lot of retailers will hire seasonals, and you need to prepare for that well in advance. Start preparing in September for your seasonal rush. Start doing your interviews and your background checks in September so that it's not December 1st and you realize, I need 10 people and I'm just going to hire them and I'm going to cut corners. The busy time is not the time to cut corners. That's where you have to have your diligence in place, and one of the key factors to reducing your internal theft is to do your background checks and your reference checks and make sure that people are who they say they are, their resume and their application and the information on it is verified and validated.
Are there any other techniques that you've come across? Let's say somebody had a good background check and they're in there. Is there some other way to know that they're checking the place out? Or
yeah, I think just asking questions that don't pertain to their job. So I'm in the IT department, but I want to know about our what are our sales, what are our deposits, like what are our shipments like. I think as a business owner, if you see empty shelves or a specific product empty, but for a fact you've sold 10 of them, maybe that's an indication, if you're not getting them replenished, that they're not being recorded at your cash register properly. Because the system doesn't know that you just sold 10 widgets, but you know that you don't have 10 widgets on the floor anymore. Why aren't you getting those back? Things like that. And there's different ways, but I think you need to look at some of the systems and some of the data, and are you getting the data, and are you able to utilize the technology properly?
Would you say Well, I think I have an idea about it, but would you say, in terms of tools that you can use to do the job of protecting, the technology is a big section of it. Would another section of it would be just knowing the business?
Correct. Yeah, and I think that you have to have. So I think it's a three-pronged approach. I think you need to have procedures in place. I think you need to have some technology in place. I think you need to have some checks and balances in place. So such as audits. So one of the main services that I provide for my clients are security on operational audits. So every quarter, every 6 months, whatever it may be, I'll do an audit of the business, and I'll see what's happening from a protection and a loss point of view. And again, if I'm hired and I know what policies and procedures are in place, what physical security is in place, then it's my decision. Whether I'm going to make the decision and choice to steal or not, because I want to know what policies and procedures are in place. And sometimes what happens, even if you have great policies and procedures, specific key managers aren't following it. So if I want to steal, Joe, I'm going to steal on your watch because you never follow policies and procedure. You leave the safe open, you don't turn the alarm on, you don't record things properly. But I'm never going to steal on Mary's watch because Mary always follows policy and procedure. And that's how the holes come to being. And not very rarely it's is it a fluke of why things happen, and it's not as random as some business owners think.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, and there's also the issue of collusion, right? And bartering's a big issue. I'm in a pizza store. I'm an hourly employee in a pizza store, and you come in, Joe, and I give you a free slice. And so then when I go to your place of business, whether it's a cafe, you're going to give me a free latte. And we just barter. And that's the kind of stuff that doesn't show up until you do your end of the year accounting and inventory, and that's unexplained loss. Because all that pizza went out the door all year. All those lattes went out the door all year. And if you're not having any checks and balances, you're not going to find it ever, and you're not going to get hit with the loss until you do your end of the year balance. So, in terms of bartering and stuff that doesn't get rung in, I often get asked, hey Dean, how can I mitigate that? And I think that one of the key ways is to look at your profit and loss statement, and you should be getting monthly reports, and maybe your inventory is off. And I'll also provide sales integrity shops for my clients. So I'll go in and I'll do a shop. They're not going to know why I'm there or who I am, and I'll see if the transaction gets recorded properly. And like I talked about earlier, typically businesses are fairly patterned in terms of sales volume. So again, every time Dean works on Wednesday night, sales are really low, but Dean goes away and 3 Wednesday nights in a row, sales are a lot higher. So again, look at your data, talk to your employees, find out what's going on.
So that's like a mystery shopper.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what that is?
Exactly what it is, yeah.
Like a checking on site, on the fly.
And again, when a client contracts me to do that, I'll be able to give them some comfort that, yeah, sales are getting rung in, with a high degree of accuracy first, because you want to make sure that they're accurate, so the sales are being properly recorded, and then obviously frequency.
So we have a few minutes left. So if somebody wants to contact you or take a workshop or take a service that you offer, how would they find you?
Yeah, the one of the simplest and best ways to find me would be to go to my website, which is www.CorreiaSecurity.ca, or call me directly, 647-888-3537. And there's no obligation. I'm happy just to talk. And business owners can tell me what their challenges are, and I'll give them some complimentary advice, no problem at all. Even before I'll go in and do an audit, Joe, I always offer a half an hour complimentary assessment with any business owner to talk about, what their challenges are, and I'll give them an idea of potentially how I could fit their solution.
Okay, and that's across the board.
Across the board, yeah, and I can do that face to face or over the phone. I'm happy to take any calls, because every time I take that call, I also learn, and I also find, I also become sharper in terms of how I can better serve my potential clients in the future.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on.
Excellent.
So that's our show for this evening, the Cube Talk Show, and it's a show about money, as I mentioned, and it'll be posted on YouTube and on thatchannel.com at 10 p.m. in the evenings, and it'll also be on my website, which is joetheinvestor.ca. And to contact me, my email is joetheinvestor.today@gmail.com. Thanks for watching and have a good evening.